Hey guys, this is Dan here from Pixelfix and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about validation, but more specifically about custom validation rules. This is one of those advanced features which you might not use that often, but I'll use a simple example to show you how to implement this. So in order for me to show you how to do this, I prepared a couple of things in our API that we're busy developing. Today we're going to add some customers. So what I've done is I've created the customer's route. I've also created the customer's controller, and I've implemented the store method in our customer controller. So I've also set up the customer service, which we would offload the actual create function of the customer to the service. If you're not quite following why I've done it this way, you can go ahead and watch one of my previous episodes where I explain why we offload the create function to a customer service. I'll also leave a link in the description below. I also went ahead to create the customer model and completed the fillable property. I also created the customers table with a few fields that we will require, and this is where we'll create the validation for this episode. Right, so what we're going to do is we'll head over to the customer. I'll just copy these fields before we add the validation, just so we don't forget any of it. We would then go into our store customer request, and this is where we're going to add our validation rules. So for the name field would definitely be required in order to create our customer. We would say it needs a minimum of, let's say, 5 characters, but we're also going to put a maximum of, say, 255, because if you go back to the migration, this string field is max 255 characters. That's why we add the limit of 255 characters. Now, our contact number, if you go back to our migration, you'll see the contact number is nullable, meaning that it's not a required field. So in this case, we would still add some validation to it, but it's not going to be required. We're just going to use the sometimes keyword, meaning that it could be there sometimes or it could not. But if it's provided, we want it to be a numeric field. So what we'll do is I'll skip the address type because that's where we're going to create our custom validation rule. For our address, let's say we also need that as a required field. We need a minimum, let's make it as 5 again, and a max of 255. And the city, let's make it the same as this. It's required with a minimum and a max. And the same goes for the postal code. Okay, so now if we want to provide the customer address type, we would think about it could be something like a billing address, or it could be a delivery address, or it could be a postal address. Now, this could easily be done with a validation rule called in, and then we can provide the validation rules for it called delivery, as well as postal address. Using it this way would work perfectly well, but we want to extract this into a separate validation rule for the simple reason we can then use that rule anywhere within our application where an address type is required. And then if you have a change, you only need to make your change in your validation rule instead of everywhere in your application you've had to specify the rule in billing, delivery, postal address. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our new validation rule. And we'll call it allowed address types. All right, so now if we go to our new rule, allowed address types, we would then do our validation in this parses method. So we would then get the attribute, which would be the address type, and the value would then be whatever the value is being passed into the request. Alright, so what we'll do is we'll define a private constant called allowed address types, and we'll make it an array, and we will place the validation rules inside the array, or the allowed types, which is the billing, delivery, postal. Okay, and now we can do our actual validation check inside the parsers method. The parsers method needs to return a boolean, so we'll use the in array method from PHP, and we'll pass in our value that we receive from the request, and we will call our allowed address types constant. And then if we go down here to the message, we'll change the default error message to something like the supplied address type is invalid. Okay, so let's go back to Postman and let's hit our customer route, fill in some information, and our contact number. Let's make it a few numbers. Our address type, let's make it work, because we know work is not in our allowed type. We want the validation to show a message. Our street is 123 Pine Street, and let's say we live in Sydney, and we'll make a postal code of 12345. If we send our data, and then there we go, our address type has been supplied with a wrong type, and we get our error message back. So now if we change this to say billing, because we know billing is one of the allowed types, try this again, and we do get an error message. That is because I forgot to run our migration. So let's try migration. Let's run our migration. There we go. And let's try this again. Third time lucky. And there we go. Our customer has been created with the supplied information. Okay, so just to recap, you create your custom validation rule. You do your check inside your parsers method. You can then change your default response message or your validation message. And then in order to use this, you would go to a form request or any kind of validation. You would then instantiate your class without your parentheses, and that is it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. And remember, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, as it will really help me out in order for me to bring you more content. Until the next episode, guys. See you then.